Hi guys, my name is Charlie. Last time I went over how to use MIDI to trigger additional samples. Today I'm going to be covering how to actually create MIDI triggers for your drum shells. So the first thing we're going to do is import our drums. So File, Import Audio, or Shift Command I. For this demo, I would like to thank Inflections for providing us with these drum tracks. We'll put a link to their channel in the description. So because we're just doing MIDI drum shells, we only need the drum shells. So we got kick, snare, and toms. Okay, so now we've got our drums imported, so we're just going to have a quick listen and see what we're working with. And kick 2. Okay, so straight away, as we can see and hear, we're going to want to be working with this one because it has a much more defined transient, so we're going to get rid of kick 2. Now snares, I assume this is snare top, snare bottom, but let's find out. Yep. So we can get rid of snare bottom, and then the toms, we just work with what we have. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go new track, create one new MIDI track. We highlight the whole MIDI track, and we go Option Shift 3, which will consolidate the track and just give us one big blank MIDI region. Double click it to open it, go down to C1, and just drop a MIDI note right there. So then we're going to duplicate this MIDI track 3 times because we're working with 4 drums. We move the MIDI tracks so that they are underneath each drum shell that we're going to use. Select each one, hold down Shift Option, and then click on where it says Clips and go down to Velocity. And this will change the view on all 4 of them to the Velocity view, which is the one I use when I do MIDI. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to make our groups. So kick MIDI and kick audio. We highlight both of them and then press Command G, which brings up the group window. And we can see we got kick and kick MIDI. Okay, done. They're now grouped. Anything I do to one is going to happen to the other. And then just do that for the others. And as you can see down here, we now have 4 groups for our 4 drums. So we're going to start off with kick. So we solo that because we don't care about what the other ones are doing right now. We zoom all the way in, highlight this MIDI note, Command C to copy it, and then delete it because there's no kick there that we need to replicate. And then the last thing you need to do is make sure that Tab to Transient is enabled. If it's disabled, this won't work. So we tap to the first transient, and we can see that that looks like it's roughly in time. This here, we know is a snare. We can tell because we can see that there's a snare there, but also it's a much smaller transient, and if you want to listen to it, you can tell that it's a snare. So we do not want a MIDI note there. Those 2 we know are kicks, then a snare, kick, kick. So most likely this is not going to be 100% accurate because all we've done is use Tap to Transient to tap to each of these transient and pasted a MIDI note there. So this relies on Tap to Transient being 100% accurate, which it rarely is. So the next thing to do is double check every single note. So you zoom all the way in, but until you have sort of this wireframe outline is about how far in I like to go because then you can see relatively accurately where the transient actually starts. So this one is the snare that we skipped, which is why there's no MIDI note. That's in time, that's in time, that's a snare, that's in time, that's in time. So now for the sake of demonstrating, I'm now going to show the same thing on snare. So snare tracks are usually a lot busier in that there's a lot more bleed. These have been recorded really well, so the transients are very obvious, both to see and hear. But you can still tell that there's a lot more bleed than there is in the kick tracks. Something else you can do that will help make the transients even more obvious to see is hold down Shift Option on your keyboard and then use the mouse wheel to change the size of the transient. This does not change the volume, it's not a clip gain. It just changes how big they look, which can be helpful when you're doing this. So first one there, we know that those are kicks because we can see them there. And we're just going to paste the notes by pressing V and tabbing to each snare. Now we're going to double check each one. And you can see these are all very accurate because these have been recorded very well. So problem areas that you might run into when you use this method. So if the drums have been edited properly, then this is significantly easier. If the drums are full of artifacts, have clicks and pops everywhere, mishits, or if they have crossfades that like mask the first half of the transient, then Tap to Transient isn't going to correctly detect where the transient is starting, which means that you then have to go in and move every note. So very frequently I will find that I do actually have to move these notes because they may trigger here, for example, when actually I want to trigger it here. Or if there's a dodgy edit or something here and there was just a spike of audio there, Tap to Transient is going to read that as the start of the transient and not here. So if you leave it there, then obviously that's going to be out of time when you come to trigger the samples, so you would then simply move it by hand and put it where it's supposed to be. Another couple of problems that you can find, just to be aware of, is anything that's fast, such as blast beats on the snare or double kicks, can be tricky to get right. But if it's performed, recorded, and edited properly, then regardless of how complex it is, using this process will be significantly easier than if none of those things have been done properly beforehand. So, the last thing I'm going to do here is just run a little test to see how accurate these triggers are. So just to recap, what we've done here is we've sent the kick MIDI into trigger, triggered a sample, and printed it onto this test track right here. We're going to put the test tracks in between the originals and the MIDI, highlight all three, make them nice and big. And as we can see here, the original kick, the triggered kick, and the MIDI are all in time with each other. So anyway, that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you found it useful and informative. Definitely let us know what you think in the comments, and be sure to check out the Brickwall Sounds website, Facebook, and Instagram, and we will see you soon.